He gave, he bought that church from the doctor, and he gave, God, I don't know what he gave for it. He gave like 150, 200,000 more than the doctor gave for it. So he's got more than $2 in that.
Okay, I'm going to call this meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals to order. Can we have the roll call, please?
First, I'll confirm that the packet was posted and the required notice of today's meeting was provided, and then I'll call roll. Board Member Dortzweiler?
Present.
Board Member Creer?
Present.
Board Member May?
Present.
Board Member Tro?
Present.
Board Member Waters?
Here.
Vice Chair Owens?
Here.
Chair Hardy.
Here.
We have 7 members, full attendance today.
And you did mention the Open Meetings Act has been, notice has been properly, okay, very good.
Yes.
All right, first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the September 21, 2023 regular meeting. Are there any changes or corrections to the minutes? Hearing none, someone move that the minutes be accepted.
Mr. Chair, I move that we accept the minutes as printed.
Second.
And any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, no. Then the minutes will be filed as presented. Under new business, we have one item. It is item application number V23-6. And do you know if we have the applicant?
We do have the applicant. They have joined us via Zoom, and so they are present with this hearing.
Very good. Okay, at this time, then we will have a staff presentation of the application.
Thank you, Chair and Board. This property that is subject of this application is the United Rentals property at the northwest corner of Santa Fe and Pacific Avenue, and shown on the aerial photo that is on our screen here. The property is part of the Episcopal Military Institute Addition, which is platted in 1887, and the property was redeveloped in 1996. So in 1996, there was a conditional use permit that was issued for the building that is currently there, and that building was originally constructed for Engine X exchange. As part of that conditional use permit application, there was a site plan that included a landscape planting plan that was approved by the Planning Commission. And so on the screen is the 1996 site plan that was approved by the Planning Commission with landscaping. At that time, it had 5 trees, 3 that were east of the building in the green space between the building and North Santa Fe. It had 2 additional trees to the north of the property, and then it also had parking lot screening in the way of shrubs that were between the off-street parking spaces in North Santa Fe on the north side of the building as well as on the south side of the building. This is a aerial photograph from 2014 that shows many of the trees still existing. There was a tree in the northeast corner of the property that had been removed, and there was a tree in the green space between the building and Santa Fe that had died and was missing as well. But 3 of the 5 trees were remaining, and all of the shrubs were still intact. And sometime between 2014 and 2017, all the trees and shrubs were removed. And currently, this is the aerial photo from earlier this year, early spring of 23, and we have 1 tree remaining, and all the other trees have been removed, as well as the landscaping screening. And what has happened is the property has been acquired or possessed by United Rentals, and they would like to remove the landscape space between the building and North Santa Fe. And this would be a reduction of about 2,000 square feet or 50% of what the Planning Commission approved, and is beyond what staff is able to approve. So the planning staff has determined that the proposed elimination of this 2,000 square foot green space is a 50% reduction and not justified by the landscape regulations and a matter of convenience for the applicant, and therefore beyond what the zoning administrator has the authority to approve administratively. And so John Raymer the project designer with engineering consultants filed this application for this variance request. As justification for the variance, he states that approval of the variance to allow 2,000 square feet of front yard landscaping area to be removed and replaced with concrete would reduce safety concerns for employees and the general public. So the reason that they're proposing, they being the applicant and United Rentals, to remove the landscape space is to create a paved area where they can take the equipment that is in the display area to the south of the building, and they can transport it to the north of the building where they have a wash bay on the north side of the building, or in the north side of the building, rather than going out into Santa Fe Avenue. So this is the proposed plan. This plan removes 2,000 square feet of landscaping and does not relocate it or replace it. This is a close-up of that same plan here. In our conversations with the applicant, there was also discussion of relocating the landscape plan from the east side of the building down to the corner, the southwest or southeast corner of the property, basically shifting the landscaping from between the building to the corner and cutting out the concrete here and then reinstalling trees and plantings so that they still met the landscape requirements. However, because they did not want to go through with that plan, the applicant has applied for this variance request. This is the second variance request that we have had since the landscape regulations were adopted in 1994. The first was Catholic Charities, their property at 1500 South 9th. When Catholic Charities went into that property, which was originally developed in 1950 as a Dillon's grocery store, they did a major renovation, and because they did a major renovation, they were required to meet the landscape regulations. So the way the landscape regulations work, any new commercial properties that come into the city are required to adhere to the landscape regulations. In addition, any pre-existing non-conforming structures or properties that are commercially zoned are also required to meet the landscape regulations if they have a substantial development. A substantial development is an addition of 30% or more of their gross area, or a increase in valuation that is 50% or more of the county's appraised value of the structure. So if you go into an older building that was constructed prior to 1994 and it's got a valuation of $100,000 and you put over $50,000 worth of renovations into it, then you are subject to the landscape regulations and must modify your site to adhere to the landscape regulations as well as you can. In the case of Catholic Charities, what they were requesting wasn't a reduction in existing landscaping, but rather just to modify their site to make it safer by removing some of the curb cuts and putting up some decorative fencing to help their parking circulation, but not taking away any of their existing parking because they didn't have any existing parking to give up at the time. And therefore that was the reason for that variance request, and also the reason why the board ended up approving that variance request for that landscaping. So in this case, we would look at the same factors we would anytime we consider a variance request. The first one is always the uniqueness and how the condition is unique to the property at hand. In this case, the applicant states that under the current building layout, equipment circulation must take place out on the public street, creating safety concerns for employees and the general public. And while staff can understand how having an internal drive that accesses the south display area with the storage bay on the north, improved circulation does not have to result in the elimination of virtually all of the green space. Again, as noted earlier, there is a plan or an option for replacing the landscaping on the site if the driving aisle becomes necessary for the operations. There's other places where the landscaping could be replaced too if it comes to that. But staff would ask what is unique about this property, that it would be treated differently and exempted from the front yard landscaping when it is provided at other commercial properties that are also in corner lots. Staff does not believe there's anything unique about the property itself, and the variance request is a result of desired convenience on the part of the applicant. Looking at adverse effects on the neighbors, the applicant states that the variance request would not adversely affect the adjacent property owners or residents in any way. Staff would agree that the removal of the landscaping on the east side of the building wouldn't have any impact on the residential properties to the west. However, it would have an impact along North Santa Fe, and the purpose of having front yard landscaping is to enhance the visual appearance of the community through the use of trees and landscaping materials to create an aesthetic pleasing environment. And the removal of the 2,000 square feet of front yard area along North Street or North Santa Fe Avenue could have a negative aesthetic impact along that corridor. In looking at unnecessary hardship, this requires more than showing a personal inconvenience or an increased cost. And in this case, the applicant states that the current application impacts their staging of equipment on the property in a significant way in order to conduct business and perform their duties in a manner that does not jeopardize the safety of their employees and the general public. And so in regards to this, staff does have a few questions. One is for the applicant to clarify why they couldn't use the overhead door access that the building has on the south side of the building to transport their equipment inside the building to the north edge of the building, the north interior of the building. So rather than going around the building, just go use the access inside the building to get to the north portion of the building. That seems like that could be a possible option. Another question of clarification that staff would ask is the green space that is on the site is currently there and was there when the applicant acquired the site. And so if it was safe to use to the standpoint that they decided to occupy the site and use the site, what has changed from the time that they occupied it that it is no longer safe, and why is it a problem now when it wasn't when they initially looked at sites and chose this site? The last question of clarification that staff would have is, in addition to the first two options, if those two options would not work, staff would ask the applicant to explain why just removing the landscape area that is between the building and Santa Fe and relocating it to the southeast corner, why wouldn't that work if it was decided by United Rentals that the access way around the building is that necessary? That seems like it would be an option, even though that does create additional expense and is inconvenient. It seems to be an option that could be viable. Many businesses depend on outdoor storage and display areas, and a lot of them would prefer to have additional outdoor storage and display areas in lieu of landscaping. And so this seems to be the most fair way of enforcing the landscape regulations across the board for all new development as well as substantial redeveloped properties. Staff is concerned that granting the variance to the amount of front yard landscaping area required on a commercial property could establish a precedent for future businesses that would rather have additional outdoor display areas or additional off-street parking or additional outdoor storage, things of that nature, in lieu of front yard landscaping. In order for the landscape regulations to be effective and fair, there needs to be a uniformly applied code that is uniformly applied as fairly as possible, evenly as possible. Staff does not believe that the applicant has demonstrated how requiring the applicant to either maintain the existing landscape front yard landscape area between North Santa Fe and the building, and replacing all of the missing trees or relocating the 2,000 square feet that they're wanting to remove to the southeast corner would create unnecessary hardship. Staff would note that the plantings have been removed, and That removal took place at an earlier date when the current property owner was talking to the zoning administrator about a letter of zoning compliance. We frequently get these requests. If somebody is looking at acquiring a property either by purchase or lease, and they're doing their due diligence, they often ask us if the property is in zoning compliance. In this particular case, the zoning administrator was unable to issue such a letter because of the missing plantings. So in addition to having the appropriate landscaping area, the site is also required to have the appropriate number of landscape plantings. And so we believe that the most fair way to deal with this is to have all of the required plantings either replaced or a new plan that has the same number of plantings and same number of landscape area to be proposed. The effect of public health, safety, and welfare. The applicant states the variance would in no way adversely affect the public health, safety, and order, convenience, prosperity, or general welfare, but would rather improve safety. Approval of the requested landscaping variance could undermine the enforcement of the landscape regulations as a front yard landscaping area, which would be contrary to the public welfare. The general public could be adversely affected if the variance were to create a precedent for other properties that improperly remove existing plantings and then wish to replace their required front yard landscaping areas with other uses. That takes us to our last topic, which is conformity with the general spirit and intent of the ordinance. And when we look at this, the variance should not be granted, which would undermine or defeat the purpose for which the regulation was adopted. And so when the landscape regulations were adopted in 1994, there were two primary purposes that these regulations were to affect. One was to encourage trees and landscape vegetation to screen unsightly views, soft and hard architectural lines, frame buildings and views, and buffer complementary land uses. The second principal primary purpose was to enhance the visual appearance of the community through the use of trees and landscape materials to create an aesthetically pleasing environment. In this case, the applicant states that the proposed variance would have in no way affect the general spirit or intent of the zoning ordinance. Parking and trees are proposed to be added, to which are above and beyond the original site plan. And staff again believes that the only way to meet the intent of landscape regulations is to replace the missing trees and plantings that have been removed by the property owner, or to propose a revised plan that have the same amount of landscaping area and the same amount of trees and shrubs as the original plan. We would note that by the way we do calculations, the proposed plan, which is on the screen here, it has a number of shrubs along between the parking spaces and North Santa Fe, and between the proposed driving aisle and Santa Fe. This particular plan would actually have less tree units than the one that was originally approved. And the primary reason behind that is because of a few of the shrubs that are shown here are actually what we would consider screening trees. They're Taylor junipers. They are very narrow columnar evergreens, and they grow quite tall, but they have like a 5-foot spread, and so they're really good for screening when you have like commercial properties adjacent to residential properties. They do a good job of reducing sound, creating a sound buffer as well as a light buffer, but they're not really tree units. So even though they're great and they have their purpose as a screening tree, they're not on our recommended list in terms of front yard tree units. So that would be part of the reason why the current plan would have, the existing plan that's on record from 1996 would have more tree units than what is currently being proposed. So that comes to our comments and our analysis. The variance application has the potential to set a precedent for future commercial redevelopment cases unless clear findings are made as to the uniqueness and hardship. The primary purpose of the zoning codes is protecting and promoting public health, safety, community appearance, and aesthetics, our important role, but secondary to public safety. When the landscaping regulations were adopted in 1996, they were intended to apply to all new commercial, institutional, and multifamily developments, which this would fall into that category. And the question for the board in this case is whether there are conditions or circumstances relating to this particular property that are not shared by other commercial properties, and the applicant is proposing to remove and not replace 2,000 square feet of front yard landscaping along Santa Fe Avenue. However, there appears to be viable alternatives to removing and not replacing the existing front yard landscaping, and if transporting equipment through the existing building or around the building by using Santa Fe are not viable options, staff did note that there are options of relocating the landscaping to another location on the property. So we do have some findings on the bottom of page 9, which reflect what we've covered in our report. You do have a number of alternatives. One, the board could approve the requested variance with or without any conditions if the required findings of fact can be made. Number 2, the board could approve a lesser variance than requested if the required findings of fact can be made. For example, the board could reduce the amount of landscaping area the applicant needs to provide from the 4,027 square feet approved by the Planning Commission as part of their conditional use permit approval in 1996. 3, the board could postpone action if you feel additional information is needed. And lastly, the board could deny the applicant's request if the required findings of fact cannot be made. In this case, the staff does believe that the findings of fact needed to approve the applicant's request are not there, and staff believes that the board should deny this applicant's variance request based on those findings that you'll find on the bottom of page 9. And so with that, staff would take any questions that you might have.
Anyone have questions for staff?
I had one, but I think he just answered it right at the end. So.
Okay. Very good. Then would the applicant like to make a presentation?
I'm Travis Rollins with United Rentals, so I'll just speak briefly in regards. So we had taken on this building on the Ahern, I think it's, can't remember, we had several acquisitions, but anyways, we have this building currently. One of the reasons too, just to take into effect, we're not able to go in route through the building just because of the way the design is. So we have a middle wall partition that will separate the wash bay. So we have to try to, take the equipment between the fence and the building. That's what we wanted. But currently, we're taking the equipment around the building through on the street to the other side. So I think in the original, the owners before us, I think it was High Reach Equipment. They didn't really have a wash bay set up, so that's the reason why we get our equipment. We do all of our washing once we get our equipment in, and to make it presentable on the outside of the, when we stage it outside. So, anyways, that's what I wanted to offer as far as some of the reasons why we can't get in through the building, and then in regards to our main concern is safety for the employees and the citizens, in that area. So that's all I have.
All right, thank you. Are there questions for the applicant?
Yes, I was wondering, Mr. Rollins, how often do you have to take your equipment out on the street? Is it once an hour, once a day, once a week? How often?
If I had my guess, that's a fairly busy branch. I would say probably 4 to 5 times a day, if I had to guess. And that just depends also. Just I couldn't really speak. I'm going to guess 4 to 5 just from what I've seen on other branches. But as far as washing equipment, but it can be even more, on a day. So I'd at least say 5 a day.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Hearing none, thank you. All right, we'll bring the discussion for this application back to the board at this time.
I guess I do have a question on, we have the proposed landscape plan, the close-up one, shows that they are the possibility of putting new landscape in there. Could we not leave that landscape and then maybe put the drive between that so that you would still have a buffer on the landscaping?
I'll bring up the aerial photo, or the plan again. So this is the plan that we talked with the applicant originally about, in order to facilitate the movement inside the lot from the display area that is the left side of the image is actually south, the right side is north. In order to get equipment and vehicles from the south side around the building, replacing the landscaping, moving it from between the building and the street to the southeast corner. So there's a way that they could basically take the 2,000 square feet that they're removing and relocate it so that they still have the same amount of landscaping. It's just configured a little differently than what it currently is. In this option, you would have some trees and plantings in the landscape area that would be new at the southeast corner, and you would have shrubs and screening along the side of the building. So this is an option that would not require variance. This is an option that staff could work with the applicant on administratively and get approval of this plan so they can move forward with the project. In lieu of this project, what they're requesting is a modified plan that looks like this, where there is some shrubs. They retain a 5-foot buffer. So this is basically the strip here that they're removing is basically 20 feet wide by 100 feet long. So that's where the 2,000 square feet comes from. The building's set back 25 feet from the property line. They would be retaining a 5-foot strip with shrubs in it. And so they would replace the shrubs that were in the landscape bed. I don't know how well that cursor's showing up on the screen. For that parking on the south side of the building, they would replace the shrubs on the landscape screening buffer on the north side as well, and they would add a new one along the proposed driving aisle. What this plan doesn't have that the other plan does is it doesn't actually relocate the landscaping, the 2,000 square feet that's being removed, to the southeast corner of the property the way the other plan does. It requests to remove it. And so really what this comes down to in staff's mind is we could work through this administratively with the applicant. It's a matter of what is really important. We understand the inconvenience of relocating the landscape buffer from its current position down to the southeast quarter. But I guess the question is, what is more convenient or what is more important to the applicant? Having a way around the building that is paved where you don't have to go into the street, or retaining this space here that is currently display area? Because the reason the applicant doesn't want to relocate the landscaping is because they'd rather use this area for displaying their equipment, which it's also worth noting that they're actually in the right-of-way with some of their displays. So these are pictures taking where we'll have to get with the applicant on that as well, of making sure that they don't display vehicles along the road, and they have to be actually on the private property and not along the road. So, but the point is that there are options available. It's just a matter of what is best for this property. Did I answer the question?
I'd like to make a comment. The city of Salina has established zoning regulations. It's my understanding that as a board, in order to, we are an appeal board, and one of the things that as a board we have to look at is if there's something unique about the property that we feel that those regulations don't necessarily apply. That's something unique about the property, not something unique about how the property is being used.
Thanks, I appreciate that. And I have a question too. did this property then conform with the landscaping requirements of 1996?
Yeah, when it was approved, it went through the planning commission, and so that planning commission approval, made it conforming. I mean, by way of the planning commission approving the plan, that plan became an approved plan that conformed.
Okay.
And that was the approved plan that was attached to the building permit that was issued for the building. And
All right.
Yeah, so that's this picture on the screen. This is the plan that is the approved landscape plan of record. So one option that the applicant would have to bring their site into conformance is to take this plan and just put it into action. Add the trees that are missing, add the shrubs that are missing, and their site would be conforming as to landscaping again.
The other thing I noticed in that area is that this property abuts residential area, and which has more setback, green setback, landscape setback, and so this, to me, it's maybe adds a little more gravity toward requiring green area that would more or less blend in better with residential area being so close. And as you mentioned, and I drove up and down Santa Fe, and there are varying setbacks and all kinds of things. It's a big mishmash on North Santa Fe, but I think the plan is to, as was mentioned, as buildings are refurbished, having major renovations done, then the landscaping comes into play, whether there's landscaping there now or not. And so that, it seems to me that to take away the landscape and replace it with paving, then we would, in a sense, be going backwards. And instead of enhancing the view of on Santa Fe as you're driving back and forth on it.
And I would just note, I've been working, the United Rentals is not the owner of this building. Mr. Todd Leiker with High Reach Equipment is the owner of the property, and I've been working with him for 5 years to try to bring it into compliance because he's the one that took it out of compliance. And so the situation was not created naturally or organically. It was created by the actions of the property owner who physically removed all the landscaping. And so I think our point being that the purpose of the landscaping is not so when staff comes out to do their final inspection and the business wants to open the doors, that the trees are there for that day and then they're not maintained after the fact. The point is that the landscaping that's planted on a site when it's developed is obligation of the owner to maintain. And in this case, instead of maintaining it, Mr. Leiker removed it.
Any other comments or questions? Then, hearing none, I would entertain a motion.
I move that we deny the applicant's request.
Okay, we have a motion to deny the application V 23-6. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of denying the application, say yes.
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 And any opposed, no. Motion carries. Is there any other unfinished or other business that we need to address?
We don't have any administrative items or unfinished carryover business. We have completed our annual business meeting on elections at your last meeting, and we will have a November meeting. We have an application filed over on Kiowa, and there will be a case come before the board at your November meeting. So we will meet.
Okay, very good. Is there any public forum interest?
We do not have anyone in the room or on Zoom from the public.
Okay. Hearing that there's no other business, then this meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals is adjourned.